Okay, so we'll be talking about how to use social and behavioral science to support pandemic response. So as you well know, fighting COVID-19 requires measured behavioral changes, like, for example, social distancing, or like practicing some forms of particular forms of physical hygiene, like washing hands or disinfecting frequently used objects, or sneezing in on your upper sleeve, but also mask wearing or vaccine uptake. Of course, the issue here is that, or the main motivation for this line of research is the fact that not all people engage in these behaviors. So there is a need to try to understand what we can do in order to improve engagement in these behaviors. So this is why there is the possibility to use social and behavioral science to support COVID-19 pandemic response. So this is a perspective article that we published in Nature Human Behavior. We are a group of scholars from different sub-disciplines, but all in social and behavioral science. And in this article published in March 2020, so at the very beginning of the pandemic, we try to describe where social and behavioral science could be helpful to support pandemic response. In case you are interested, you can just Google the article, or maybe I can just put it here. Let me put it in the chat so that perhaps you can look at it. Let me see Q&A. Where can I put? Maybe I cannot write in the chat here. Annotate. And there is. Okay, apparently there is no chat in this version. Okay, so there is no way I can give you the article, I guess. Okay, but if you Google the title of the article, you can find it easily because it's open access. Okay, then a subset of this set of people, led by J. Van Bavel, started an international collaboration on social and moral psychology. So so here you can find the names. There were Mark Alfano, Paolo Boggio, myself, Alexandra Cicioca, Holger Siastad, and J. Van Bavel. So and the idea was to bring together scholars from around the globe to examine psychological factors underlying the attitudes and behavioral intentions related to COVID-19. So what we did is to build a survey. So I'm going to spend a few minutes on this slide because this is the main part of this presentation. So what we actually measured. Of course, we wanted to, okay, let me first tell you that this figure is structured in three columns. So we have this superordinate construct, and within that we have some constructs, and within the constructs we have specific measures and or items. So first of all, we wanted to measure behaviors related to COVID-19. So the main superordinate construct is related to COVID-19 beliefs and compliance. In terms of the specific constructs, so first of all, we have public health support, which we divided into three measures: special distancing, physical hygiene, and policy support. So to be a bit more specific, in the spatial distancing measure, the items that we have, we have 5 items that you can see over there about practicing spatial distancing. So for example, the first item is I have been staying at home as much as practically possible. So don't forget that this survey was thought and developed at the very beginning of the pandemic in April 2020. So when the Western, well, Europe and the UK was entering the first lockdown. Then we had some 5 items about physical hygiene. As I said before, they were mainly about washing hands, but not all about washing hands. There was also one item about disinfecting frequently used objects and one item about sneezing and coughing into the upper sleeve. And then there were 5 items about policy support. Regarding the closure of schools and universities, bars and restaurants, parks, and so on. You might ask why there were no items about mask wearing and vaccine uptake. The answer is easy, because we were in March 2020 or early April 2020. And if you remember that period, there was, first of all, nobody was talking about vaccine yet. And even about mask wearing, it was not clear at all that mask wearing would help fighting COVID-19. So we did not put it there. Then passing to the second construct, this is about COVID-19 risk perception. So people were asked 2 questions by April 30 to 2021. So 1 year after the recollection, how likely do you think it is that you will get infected? And how likely do you think the average person in your country will get infected? Then we had COVID-19 conspiracy beliefs. These are 4 items with 4 conspiracy theories that were quite popular at the time, like the coronavirus is a bioweapon engineered by scientists, or the coronavirus is a conspiracy to take away citizens' rights for good and establish an authoritarian government. One thing to note here is that not all these conspiracy theories negated the existence of, or denied the existence of COVID. So especially the first conspiracy theory affirmed the existence of COVID, but denied the official mainstream narrative about that. And then the last construct of this first class or superordinate construct is COVID-19 test. We just asked whether people were tested positive, or whether they knew someone who was tested positive. Again, this survey was developed in March 2020, where very few people were actually positive or knew someone who was positive. Then moving to the next superordinate constructs, we measure identity and social attitudes. We had in particular 3 constructs. So one is national identity or national identification. This is a measure of the extent to which you are proud to be of your own country. And next, there is national narcissism, which is the extent to which you believe that your country is superior to other countries. So this is slightly different from national identification. National identity is just about pride, how proud you are of your country. The national narcissism adds to this a narcissistic part. So the extent to which you think that your country is better than other countries. So national identification and national narcissism are typically correlated because they share a core, but they are not the same measure. So they typically correlate between themselves, but they also correlate externally with different outcomes. And we will see an example of this during this lecture. Then the third construct is social belonging, where people feel connected with others. Then we have a question about political ideology. So this is only one item because, well, this is interesting that basically all over the world you can describe people political ideology by just a one-dimensional item that simply goes from left to right. Then we have three measures related to health and well-being. One is subjective physical health. We ask people how they rate their physical health at that moment. And wealth ladder. So here, this is a standard ladder where people can put themselves in relation of how they think they are in terms of wealth with respect to other people. And then we had psychological well-being. So whether people feel that they feel good at that moment. Then let's move to this superordinate construct, because this is very important, and also I will spend some time on this today. This is about moral beliefs and motivations. So one construct was generosity. So this was an hypothetical dictator game where people were given, or they were asked to imagine they possessed, or they were given the amount of money that corresponds to the daily wage in their country, and they have to split this money between themselves, a national charity and an international charity. Then we measured morality as cooperation, so a construct called morality as cooperation. This comes from a recent theory coming out from a young anthropologist in Oxford. His name is Oliver Curry. So he's developing this theory that human morality is developed in order to favor cooperation within a society. And starting from this idea, he used game theory to decompose human morality into 7 fundamental dimensions. And here, if you count those items on the right column, you get 7 items, because there is indeed one item for each dimension. So this is a measure of the extent to which each dimension is important for a participant. Then we have moral identity. Moral identity is an older construct, still very used, older with respect to morality as cooperation, which is very recent, but still it comes out from a paper in 2002, so 20-year-old, by Aquino and Reed. And here the idea of moral identity is that we can measure 2 sub-dimensions that together makes the moral identity. So the symbolization and internalization dimensions of moral identity. So the internalized dimension is the extent to which being moral is important to your self-concept, while the symbolization subdimension is a measure of the extent to which being moral, well, looking moral is important. So for example, let's look at these items quickly, because I think this would make much clearer the distinction between these 2 subdimensions. So the way this moral identity measure works is that you read a set of characteristics: caring, compassionate, fair, friendly, generous, helpful, hardworking, honest, and kind. Uh, and and then you answer a set of questions like, it would make me feel good to be a person who has these characteristics, and you have to rate from 0 to 10 whether you agree or disagree with this statement. And clearly this is about feeling about having these characteristics. So this first question belongs to the internalized subdimension of moral identity, because it's about having these characteristics, it's about being moral. But now if we move to the third question, I often wear clothes that identify me as having these characteristics. This is not about having these characteristics. It's about showing these characteristics to the outside world. And this third question is indeed related to the symbolized dimension of moral identity. And then moving to the fourth moral construct is the moral circle. Here you have to imagine a set of concentric circles where at the very beginning, well, at the very center, there is yourself. Then there is all of your immediate family, and then you actually have 16 circles. And for example, you have your continent, all humans in the planet, but you also have all living creatures. The more you grow, and the last circle is actually all things in existence, and you have to select the circle that consists to um, uh, to the larger circle of things that you care of morally. And then we had a bunch of personality traits. We had open-mindedness. Open-mindedness is defined as the tendency or the openness to change one's own idea. So this is measured through 6 items, like for example, well, some items are reversed. So for example, if you take the first item, I think that paying attention to people who disagree with me is a waste of time. Of course, this is the opposite of open-mindedness. And this is why you can, when you do the analysis, you have to reverse this item. If you compare this with the second item, I feel no shame learning from someone who knows more than me. It's clear that the second item really measure open-mindedness, while the first item is the reverse of open-mindedness. So, but this is standard in this kind of research to have some items that are reversed in order also to check consistency of answers and avoid and get rid of people who just I don't know, respond the midpoint everywhere. Then we had self-esteem, just one item. We had trait optimism, whether a person is optimistic. We had trait self-control. We had narcissism. So this is individual narcissism. Before we saw national narcissism, and which is the extent to which a person thinks that he or she is better. A person thinks that his or her country is better than the other countries. So this is national narcissism. And brought down to the individual level, you have the standard individual narcissism that you are probably more familiar of. Is the extent to which a person thinks that he or she is better than other people. So this is one of the standard scale to measure narcissism. So for example, I react annoyed if another person steals the show from me. I deserve to be seen as a great personality. I want my rivals to fail. Being a very special person gives me a lot of strength. I managed to be the center of attention with my outstanding contributions. Most people are somehow losers. So this is individual narcissism. And then we have finally the cognitive reflection test. So this is a measure of the tendency or the capacity to overcome immediate reactions and that might be wrong, and stop and think to find the correct solutions. So like just to make an example, the first item, a postcard and a pen, cost 150 cents in total. The postcard costs 100 cents more than the pen. How many cents does the pen cost? So if you thought 50 cents, this is completely fine. Most people first thought is actually 50 cents. But this is because this is the intuitive answer, but this answer is wrong. Because if the pen costs 50 cents and the postcard costs 100 cents more than the pen, then the postcard costs 150 cents. So you have 150 cents for the postcard plus 50 cents for the pen. The sum is 200 cents, which contradict the initial assumption that the postcard and the pen cost 150 cents in total. So actually here the solution is not 50 cents, it's 25 cents. Because if the pen costs 25 cents, the postcard costs 100 cents more than the pen, so you get 125 cents for the postcard, and then you sum 125 and 25, then you get the right sum, which is 150. And you have 3 questions like this. And then finally, we had some demographics like the age, like whether they have children, employment status, marital status, gender, whether they live in a urban or a rural area, and that's it. Okay, let me say something that perhaps was not very clear. I don't think I said this. Let's go back 1 second to the to this to the previous slide. I said that we were 6 organizers here, but at this stage, we were only the 6 of us. So we were just emailing and us among us and drafting the survey. But then we made the public step. So we did the public launch of the project. This was in early April 2020. Public launch doesn't mean that we started collecting data. What we did is that we sent through social networks or social media and private emails to collaborators around the world, we sent the project. So for example, we were quite strong on Twitter because Jay Van Bavel has more than 30,000 followers. Some of us have several thousand followers. So we were quite strong on Twitter. So we just wrote a tweet by saying that we had this project and they could just go, that we wanted to collect the data from all over the world. And they could just click on the link and get the specifications of the project. And in particular, interested people were supposed to join the project not as individuals, but as national teams. Of course, here everything is very flexible. For example, it happened that more than one group from the same nation wanted to join the project. Like, for example, I was the leader of the Italian team, and we had to join 3 different teams because we had 3 different requests from Italy. And of course, in that case, we just created one national team by putting together these 3 groups. So happened several times. It also happened that maybe a single person showed an interest in the project, but he or she didn't have a national team to back up. So we put this person in contact with an existing national team. In any case, so the project became relatively viral, especially for research projects. This is not entertainment. So when you say when we say viral, we mean a few hundreds or just 1,000 retweets or something like this. But much better than the standard research project. And indeed, we managed to get over 250 scholars from 69 countries and territories from all continents but Antarctica. And then we started data collection. So, of course, there were something in between. First of all, we sent the survey to all national teams. National teams were responsible of translating the survey into the local language, though the translation was done using the forward-backward method. I don't know if you're familiar with this method. Basically, this means that a team is split into two teams. One team, so like consider the Italian team. So we had the survey originally developed in English. Then a subgroup of the Italian team translated the survey into Italian. Then then delivered the translated survey to the other subgroup of the Italian team, and this subgroup translated back the survey from Italian to English without knowing, so this is important, without knowing the original English survey. So then we compared the original English survey with the back translated survey after all this round. And if there were discrepancy, there was a discussion on how to solve these discrepancies. And this was done by every national team for their local language. So national teams were responsible for doing this. And national teams were also responsible for collecting data into their nation and also for paying for data collection. Although also in this case we were quite flexible because we could afford some funding for especially developing countries. So of course this was a very large project and we did not have funding for every data collection in every single country, but we could help with developing countries. And here in this slide, you see the sample size across the countries. You see that there is a bit of variation in two dimensions, in the sample size and also in the geographical location of the samples. So for example, we have some countries that were able to contribute with a lot of data. For example, in Brazil, we have more than 2,000 data points. This helped also the fact that one of the organizers, Paulo Boggio, is Brazilian. Also, Australia is very well represented, and basically all European and North American countries are well represented. Also, Argentina is well represented, but we do have some countries that are very little represented, like in South America, apart from Brazil, Argentina, and Colombia, we have very few observations like Chile, Peru, Bolivia, Venezuela. Those are just a bunch of observations. We have no one in Guyana and so above Brazil, those three nations there. And we don't have basically anyone in Central. Well, we do have some observations in Central America, but not many. In Europe, Europe is very well represented, although we don't have all the countries. For example, we are missing Portugal, we are missing Czech Republic, we are missing some, well, most of ex-Yugoslavian countries. And then we were not very so well, in Africa we have very few observations. We have some, but very, very few. And same thing for Middle East and for Southeast. But still, this is much bigger than every study that was done until that moment. Of course, we were not the only group having this idea. So there are other studies on COVID-19 with similarly large samples, but and they all have the same issues because finding data in Africa, Middle East, and Southeast is more complicated. Collecting data there is more complicated. Okay, so then we started doing the analysis. So we started from measuring the effect of national identity on pandemic response. Let me go back 1 second to the survey. So here, apart from the constructs related to COVID-19, the main, the first constructs that we added was national identification, because, so here we started with the idea that it is possible that national identification is related to COVID-19 response for basically for one reason, because national identification, as I said before, relates to the pride that people have of being of their nation. And typically this is related to local forms of cooperation, because if you're proud of your nation, you tend to cooperate with your nations, with people in your nation. And since COVID-19 at the very beginning was, of course, already a global issue, but the approach was very at the level of the government, so at the national level, we predicted that national identification would be associated with pandemic response. And importantly, we had to control for other variables. As I mentioned before, national identification tends to share a core with the national narcissism, but also, I did not say this before, but I can tell you now, also with political ideology. And especially, well, of course, the right wing side, the right wing of political ideology. And these three measures, national identification, national narcissism, and political ideology, right wing, they tend to be correlated, as you can easily imagine if you follow a little bit of politics. But they are not the same thing. They tend to, the fact that they share a core doesn't mean that they are the same thing. And indeed, now we are going to see that they predict different things. Okay, so these are the results of the first study, that was published in Nature Communications. Let me tell you how to read this graph. So on the x-axis, we report the coefficient of the regressions where the dependent variable was physical contact or social distancing. This corresponds to the red points, or policy support. This corresponds to the green points, or physical hygiene. This corresponds to the blue points. And these are reported at the national level, as you can easily imagine from the figure. And what is impressive about this result is the fact that if you look at the x-axis, it starts at 0. So basically there is only one negative value, which corresponds to Israel green, so policy support Israel. So apart from this, all the rest, all the other coefficients are positive, meaning that everywhere, apart from one single case, and here we have more than 200 regressions because we have 69 times 3, which is 207 regressions, only one gives a negative coefficient. So national identity predicted pandemic response everywhere. And this it's important to note that it was beyond political orientation, which mainly had a negative effect. So political orientation, right wing. So the verse is such that being supporting right wing was negatively related to measures of pandemic response. So again, despite the fact national identity is positively correlated with being right-wing, then national identity itself predicted positively pandemic response, while being right-wing predicted negatively the pandemic response. So these two measures, national identity and political orientation, are correlated, but they are not the same thing. I'm sure that some of you, or maybe some of your friends, probably some of people that you know might score high in national identity, although being left wing. And in terms of national narcissism, this had an inconsistent and weaker effect anyways. But these results are include the covariates, include political orientation and national narcissism as covariates. Okay, you might say that one limitation of this first study is that it only measures intentions. So of course we could not really measure whether people were practicing physical distancing. And this was indeed one of the criticism from the reviewers and Nature Communications, who suggested to do a second study, which we did, and it's published in Nature Communications as well in the same paper, where we tried to replicate the same result using a measure of actual social distancing, real social distancing. And to do this, we use the Google Community Mobility Reports. So these are data about, these are publicly available data. You can get them yourself from Google. You can download them from Google, which are about, which are data about the extent to which people went to the to pharmacies or to parks. Of course, these are data collected using the GPS. So basically, the idea here is that, of course, they are anonymous data, but through the phones, through the GPS, you can say how many people went to that pharmacy today, and you can compare with tomorrow and in 2 days, and you can understand, you can deduce whether there was a reduction in mobility or not during a period of time. And Google already gives you this data, and so there is a measure of reduction in mobility during the pandemic. And we compared this, we correlated this with national identity, but this time, instead of using our measure of national identity, we took the one from the World Value Survey, and we replicated the finding that I mentioned before. So high national identity was associated with more reduction in mobility during the pandemic. We also checked the cross relationships, meaning that we correlated World Value Survey, so national identity measured using the World Value Survey with our measure of social distancing, and we replicated this finding again. And we also correlated national identity measured using our items with reduction in mobility measured using Google mobility reports, and we replicated this finding again. And then the second paper of the collaboration, we reasoned in a very simple way. We said, okay, we have all this data. Instead of just checking the effect on one variable, let's try to put everything together, then run a machine learning algorithm and try to find out the variables that affect pandemic response the most. We did this and we obtained these results. So let's spend a few minutes on this. So this paper, we actually got the positive news last week. So the paper was accepted in PNAS Nexus. So in this figure, we report the partial dependence plots of each predictor on the three main dependent variables that are again avoiding contact, maintaining physical hygiene, and policy support. Partial dependent plots means that this allows to represent relationships between variables without the linearity assumption. So the relationship can be whatever it is. So you get the best approximation of the actual relationship. So you see some of these relationships are not linear. And also this is a partial dependence plots, meaning that so the other relationships are partial out, in the sense that when you look at the relationship between, for example, CRT, cognitive reflection test, and avoiding distance, then you control for all other variables. So you really have the net effect of CRT. And so let's comment this for a few minutes. So first of all, let's tell the effect of national identity that was that I mentioned before and is replicated, although it's not huge, but if you move on national identity, so this starts from minus 0.12 more or less, and then goes to the positive numbers. Here is about 0.10 or so. So there is a positive effect of national identity, even when using machine learning or partialing out all the other relationships. But what's impressive here is the fact that there are other variables that have a much stronger effect. And especially, so the strongest effect by all means is from moral identity internalization. So it starts from very negative and get to very positive. Let me remind you that moral identity internalization measures the extent to which being moral is important to your self-concept. And this was the most consistent predictor overall. But also, another strong predictor was morality as cooperation here. This also starts from negative and get to positive. Let me remind you that morality as cooperation is this measure of the extent to which people endorse 7 moral principles that increase cooperation within a society. So this is in line with an idea that is shaping a lot among social scientists in the last couple of years, that engaging in these forms of pandemic response is very much related to to pro-social behavior. We did find also other positive relationships like open-mindedness. You can see it up here. So this is the extent to which people are open to change their mind, but also the sense of belonging, so the extent to which people feel connected to others, which is again related to a positive relationship with others. So in general, it seems that this forms of pandemic response are all related to the connection that people have with others and how they interact with others in positive ways. What else? Self-control was also positive. So this is not really about the connection with others, but probably people had to stop an impulse not to follow these rules, because obviously these rules were tiring for most of the people. So people had to exert self-control. We had also some non-linear relationships like collective narcissism and morality, moral identity symbolization. And I particularly like these two because somehow they are similar, because collective narcissism is about showing the greatness of your nation. Is again, it's a form of narcissism, but at the national level. So it's not showing the greatness of yourself, but showing the greatness of your nation. While moral identity symbolization is about showing your morality. So there is in both cases this form of showing to others something. Although, however, in the individual narcissism, which here is split into two dimensions, the rivalry subdimension and the admiration subdimension, doesn't look to have, or at least it doesn't obviously or clearly have a nonlinear relationship, although maybe putting them together it would. Maybe admiration is slightly U-shaped. In any case, here there is a bunch of relationships. I don't know if you like gender differences, or you can see up here that we find quite strong gender differences. One is males, two is females. So women were more likely to practice social distancing, maintaining hygiene, and support political rules. And I think this is more or less it. So thanks a lot for your attention. Here I include a few references in case you're interested in looking at the details. So the first paper here is the perspective article I mentioned at the beginning, published in Nature Human Behavior. This is open access, so you can find it just by Googling it. The second paper is the Nature Communications paper, where we show that national identity predicts public health support during a global pandemic. This is also open access, actually. So you can easily find that as well, if you like. And then the third paper, this is not available yet because, as I mentioned before, we got the acceptance letter from PNS Nexus like 1 week ago. So we are now writing, just putting it into final form, and it should be available soon. Okay, so I will stop here. Of course, I would be happy to take your questions if you have any. You can find also my email address here in case you want to ask me questions by email. I'm happy to answer by email as well. I think there is a question here. Can national identity of animals be measured and used to predict their behavior? Well, I don't know how to define nation among animals because animals are not defined in nations, are not divided in nations, but one, of course, one can take this into an abstract, more abstract way, and try to measure the extent to which an animal feels connected to a group. So for example, there are animals that are typically very individualistic, like cats, I don't know, or animals that live into groups like chimpanzees. So, and one could try to measure the extent to which sorry. So, and one can try to measure the extent to which an animal feel connected to the tribe, for example. I don't know if animal behavior scholars are trying to do this. To be honest, I worked only on humans, so I don't have a specific answer of this. But yeah, it could be an interesting question to ask to people studying animal behavior. There is another question, Jerry. When measuring personality psychological biases between countries, do you measure it for only citizens currently living in the country or for those abroad too? This is a very interesting question as well. So we consider, so there is another question as well. So we consider only people currently living in the country. Although I completely get your point, which I think the hidden point here is that people that live abroad might score differently in some of these measures than people that live in the country, and I think this would be a very interesting question for a different research. Um, which goes beyond what we wanted to do. But yeah, certainly something that one should look at. Then anonymous attendee, what is the economics course like at Middlesex? Well, you will be studying some basic notions. So like the first year, you are going to take a microeconomics course and statistics and mathematics. And also macro, so micro and macro. And in the second year, you will do basically the same courses in a slightly more advanced ways. And then you are going to get specialized from the third year into what you prefer. So you can choose your own courses. I don't know, the question is so general that it's difficult to give specific answers, but what I can say is that the course is not very technical. So although there is some mathematics and some statistics, these are done in a relatively qualitative way. Of course, they are quantitative courses. So the better you know mathematics, the better for you. I can tell you because I teach mathematics, but they are quite qualitative. So I don't know. This is what I can. If you have some other specific questions, I'm happy to take them. So, is your field of expertise similar to anthropology? Okay, my field of expertise is quite weird, to be honest, because I have a degree. I actually have a PhD in mathematics. So I started as a mathematician, and then I moved to applications of mathematics into economics and psychology, trying to understand how people make decisions. So I never studied anthropology, so I don't know much about anthropology. So I have this strange expertise, which is somehow between three disciplines, which is mathematics, economics, and psychology. Then, without economics A level, will I be disadvantaged? This is a good question. you will certainly have more troubles than others. Well, not than others, than people with an A level, but you will not be the only one. So there are several. I don't know the stats exactly, but I'm sure that there is a big proportion of people without an A level in economics or in maths. And if you study, if you like the subjects, if you study, I'm sure you can make it. The passion is all. Is there any strong causation or correlation between national identity or narcissism and economic growth? This is a very, very interesting question. I don't know. On top of my mind, I don't know. But I think it's a very interesting question. Yeah, one should definitely look at this. It could be a subject for research for sure. Yeah, good question. Good. I'm sorry not to be able to answer, but I hope maybe you will be able to answer to it and write a paper in the future on this. Jerry again, how can you be sure of countries' individual trait like narcissism? Aren't they qualitative normative data which are hard to accurately define? What to say? We ask these questions to people, so they give their own answers. So we are not telling them, so we are not defining them narcissist or not. We are just asking them to answer some questions, and we then use the scale, and we don't say that a person or a country is narcissist. We simply say that on a score from 0 to 10, on a scale from 0 to 10, because our scale is like this, they score 7, for example, to this measure of narcissism. Yeah, of course. Okay, so the question disappeared. How big a part have TRIPS, trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, had on the distribution of COVID vaccines globally? How big? Let me reread. How big a part? How big? Okay, let me be honest. You are asking me something that is beyond my knowledge, and also probably it has very delicate, I don't know how to say, implications. So I prefer not to answer these questions for obvious reasons. Anonymous attendee, what journals resources do you use for economics information, and which journals are the best for economic articles? Okay, I can type this answer because I can tell you what are the top 5. If you publish in one of these journals, you will immediately become a very well-respected economist. You will receive job offers, invitations to speak in seminars, and so on. To be honest, you can do a decent career without ever publishing in these journals. For example, I never published in this journal. I'm not the best economist in the world, but I'm not the worst either. So I'm writing them econometrica. There is one missing. Which one is it? One second. I've lapses. I wrote 4 of them. Oops. The Quarterly Journal of Economics. Yes, let me come back to the Q&A. Quarterly Journal of economics. Okay. Another question: in what context, if any, could narcissism be beneficial for society as a whole? This is an interesting question. This is an interesting question. To be honest, it's difficult for me to imagine. So we are talking about collective narcissism here. I don't think about individual narcissism, I guess, because you are asking about the beneficial for the society as a whole. So national collective narcissism is about showing greatness, and so somehow it misses the part of actually being great. And this is why I don't think that when depurated from national identity, which is about being great, not about showing to be great, then national narcissism loses its power because it remains only the bad part, only the showing without being. So it is difficult for me to imagine a situation in which collective narcissism is beneficial for a society. Of course, one can imagine, okay, I'm contradicting myself. One can imagine a situation in which there is a conflict between two societies, society A and society B. Society A is very narcissist, and so much that it is able to convince society B that it is greater than them. So society A is greater than society B. So society B decides not to enter the conflict and to be conquered, I don't know, by society A. So from the point of view of society A, this could be beneficial. So this might be a situation in which, of course, from the local point of view of society A, this could be beneficial.
Well, I just want to say a huge thank you to you, Valerio. It was a very insightful and informative presentation. So thank you so much. And so that's all we have time for today. So I want to say thank you to all of you for joining us today. And I hope everyone has a lovely evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.